Hey, this is Lily from Power Trip, and this is Power Tripping, a chance for the Psymposia team to deep dive into recent episodes. We are a 501c3 nonprofit psychedelic watchdog organization. You can support our work at symposia.com/donate. You can listen to Power Trip wherever podcasts are available, and tune in here for Nerd Talk.
Well, so hello and welcome to an episode of Plus 3. This is our first kind of debrief chats and reaction to episode 1 of Power Trip. I feel like people have probably heard enough of my voice at this point. And so I'm really excited to introduce people to my team of amazing colleagues and friends in the work that Dave and I do at Psymposia. And I guess one thing I did want to say that I think is reflected very much in the spirit of this group is that you can love psychedelics and still have critical things to say about it. And I think there's a long history of dismissing any critique as somehow advancing a prohibitionist narrative. And that's just not the case and doesn't actually help the movement. Anyway, I'm Lily K. Ross. I am one of the, I guess Dave and I reported and produced and are co-creators of Power Trip in collaboration with New York Magazine. And this is like, these are some of my favorite people. Mm-hmm. So I guess, so one of the things I was excited about doing was just kind of giving a chance for people to introduce themselves so people can start getting to know the Psymposia team and how amazing they are. So yeah, who wants to go first?
What about Normie? Let's make him go first because he's the co-founder of Psymposia.
Yeah.
And also he goes by Normie, so he's like, you know.
You guys made me Normie. No one ever called me Normie until you gave me that title, actually. Brian Normand. I co-founded Psymposia back in 2014. I was a student at UMass Amherst at the time. We did a conference there. We did a conference the next year. At the time, we started doing articles. At the time, I wanted there to be more articles on psychedelics and drugs out there. Within the last 8 years, I mean, this is a tremendously different space now. At the time, just wanted there to be more, I don't know about critical articles, but just articles that were kind of real talk back then to a degree. And we started that. Niche was actually, I think, the first article pretty much that we had, the Coming Out of the Psychedelic Closet series back then. 8 years has gone by fast, and I don't know. We've seen the space go in a lot of directions since then.
Well, and you told me that Psymposia, like the goal was to have like ongoing discussions, right? That it was supposed to sort of invite the conversations. We've had various chats about trying to sort of highlight the in the halls effect of psychedelic conferences. So one of the oft repeated lines is like the best part of psychedelic conferences are the conversations that happen in the halls, and you'll find like old heads and researchers and new enthusiastic folks sort of all talking about the things that they're excited about in way less formal manners than you'll see on the stages. And at least since I've been following Psymposia back from the beginning, I guess, or close to it, like I think you've done a really good job of cultivating that kind of space, and it's been interesting to see it change over time.
Sure, thanks too.
Yeah,
but
for sure.
I mean, it's really the team. Honestly, it's I think I've been stubborn being in this space for so long. I think I'm a little stubborn, but it's really the team and the people that I work with.
I think you have to be stubborn to stay in this space.
Yeah, extremely.
Yeah.
Especially if you're not a cheerleader.
Full disclosure, I think I was early on, at least for the first, from 2000, even before. So Psymposia started in early 2014, but in the few years before that, this is when very few people knew about some of the groups that were in the space, and I became interested in it, and so I was sort of towing the line at the time, and it really wasn't until 2018, to a degree. I want to give myself a little credit here, but it wasn't until 2018 when I linked up with Dave, and in 2018 was sort of a big pivot moment for psychedelics, because that was when Compass Pathways entered, and at the time I linked up with Dave, and Dave was in 2018. Nobody knew what Compass was. It was very, very, very new. Up until that point within psychedelia, first off, you did not call it the psychedelics industry. That's new. Mm-hmm. You called it the psychedelic community, the psychedelic space, something like that. Dave was one of the only other people. It was in March or April of 2018 that I had heard about Compass. There was some people making sort of sounding the alarms on Compass, and Compass Pathways is a big company now, one of the Peter Thiel-backed companies, and just very few people knew. So when I came across Dave, like I already knew him from a few years prior, but we hadn't talked really. I think there might have been one or two email exchanges, and Dave was super enthusiastic and like interested in doing a deep dive into what was going on. And so me and him really hit it off. And that was really sort of the genesis of the current version of Psymposia. Psymposia has taken on many different forms. We've done some stupid shit. And so that was sort of the genesis of this kind of new form, that we have. For a little bit.
Well, it was around that time that we
hey, you have to introduce yourself.
Oh, excuse me. My name's Brian Pace, and I wasn't trying to introduce myself, but comment on the conversation. But anyhow, it was around that time when Psymposia became a 501c3, and when we recognized a need for a watchdog in the space, and in seeing that need, we said, well, what are our goals? What are our capacities? Collectively, we had, we have decades of experience, both sort of in the more public psychedelic space, and also just sort of personally exploring psychedelics. I guess.
So tell us about that. What do you do?
Oh, jeez.
Who are you?
So, my formal training is as a plant evolutionary ecologist, and I've spent a lot of time traveling around, both in Latin America and parts of Asia. But probably most of my time is spent in southern Mexico, where I did my PhD work. A lot of the work that I did, whether it was in the Ecuadorian Amazon or in the southern Mexican highlands, brought me into contact with some indigenous groups. I was studying farming systems and climate change. But I've been taking psychedelics since I was a teenager, and always very, very interested in them. And in many ways, there wasn't a psychedelics industry. There wasn't really an easy path in academia to approach them, unless you were an exceedingly lucky and savvy, neuroscientist or psychologist or something, and neither of those were my interests. So I pursued things by studying ethnobotany and mycology, and phytochemistry and such. And in sort of a very non-traditional academic way, started talking about drugs. Talking about cannabis at the Ohio State University. I've taught several classes on cannabis, and I currently teach a class on psychedelic studies, and that's been going on for the last year. It's been pretty rewarding. But, with regard to Psymposia, I was first attracted to Psymposia because of the critical takes. I'm pretty sure the first Psymposia article I read was Nishé's, coming out of the Psychedelic Closet series. And I was, impressed. And I was like, why isn't there more of this, I think there was another series that was very shortly introduced by Normie, actually, that was just like, hey, why is we should talk about diversity in the psychedelic space, and then there was a series of articles that came out that way, and I was just really impressed with that level of discourse. And so I sought these people out. I sought out Normie at conferences and got to know him sort of slowly. Specifically sought out Dave at a conference. So, yeah.
And you've done some really dope, writing on psychedelics and the right wing and reactionaries and, sort of...
Yeah, speaking of, caring about psychedelics, not necessarily meaning that you can't say a critical word or two. One of the things, as a sort of a public educator on these topics, which I think everybody here qualifies as, it doesn't do us any good to, tell happy, shiny stories about psychedelics, to only focus on, the catharsis and revelation, the connection and healing, because frankly, that's not the full story. It is part of the story. And yes, I also am a psychedelic cheerleader in recovery. But if we are to do this thing that's happening where, there is a broad discussion and interest in bringing psychedelics into, more normalized conversation, I think it's a conversation very similar to sex, and that we need to not just, show teenagers pictures of diseased genitals when talking about sex, but we also don't need to just talk about orgasms all the time. We need to have a nuanced conversation if we want to provide people with the tools to understand what's what.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to hear from Nishay.
You do?
Mm-hmm.
Hi. Yeah. So I've been working in the field since 2010. I started teaching psychedelic studies classes at the University of Pennsylvania in 2012, which is the year that I also hosted the first psychedelics conference, which at the time was the first university-sponsored psychedelics conference since the resurgence of research. And Pace and I are involved in Psychedemia 2022, which is the coming back after 10 years, happening next.
Yes, we are.
Next August at the Ohio State University. Yeah, so it's very exciting. And yeah, I think we're trying to, in our work and at that conference specifically, and by our work I mean at Psymposia, bring nuanced, critical takes to thinking about psychedelics in a well-rounded way that, is a power and equity and access and diversity and all those things.
Sure, Dave. I think you had something good to define that, to shape that, kind of what we're about the other day. I don't mean to put you on the spot here. I just think it was actually a really good insight.
To think about what you were referencing, but I assume you're talking about non-prohibitionist critical takes around psychedelia.
Absolutely.
The notion that we can talk about issues that are concerning even as people who use drugs. And I think Russell's done a really good job of that sort of across the board. I have to say, coming on early with both of you and talking to stories that seemed really central to emergence of a psychedelics industry, such as from mining to mushrooms, which is this great series that Russ did that basically looked at the intersections of extractive industry and the emerging psychedelic industry. So I'll just shut up and let Russ tell you a little bit about who he is.
Well, thank you. Yeah, my name is Russell, and I'm a journalist, and I've been working with Psymposia since 2017. And for reasons that other people have already stated, I became interested in Psymposia, specifically in Shay's series, the diversity series that was mentioned. And really, I knew as someone who loved psychedelics and had used psychedelics and been interested in psychedelics that I wanted to write about them and the space. And Psymposia at the time I was interested in doing that or pursuing that was really putting out the most nuanced conversations in the space that I could find. And so, yeah, I reached out. I think my initial contact, it doesn't matter. I can't remember who it was now, but I don't think they're with us anymore. But I was kind of quickly passed along to Normie, I think, because the person who I was initially in contact with left, and started writing, kind of got into dissecting MAPS phase 3 trials and things like that. And that was around the same time that I think Dave became involved, and he definitely took me down the path of the Compass deep dive. So I got to kind of come along on that journey with Dave and Normie. And the rest is kind of history there.
Would you call it a shamanic healing journey?
Definitely a trip. I don't know about a shamanic healing journey though. But yeah, I try to approach coverage of the psychedelic space as a lover of psychedelics, and like with the admission that they've had a formative role in my life. But I'm kind of critical of the way they're being commodified and used by people in power, or abused in certain different ways.
I want to give Russell credit here.
Psymposia has been a great outlet for that.
I want to give you credit, Russell, because the way that I see this space right now, we've reached peak. I think we've hit peak, and we're going to start seeing. I think we're going to start seeing the coverage change in the space a little bit. And what I'm seeing right now is some outlets, some very large outlets that have an interest in covering psychedelics. I do see a lot of that is built on the work that Russell has done. And like, you were covering these things earlier than anyone that's out there.
I'm constantly in awe of Russell's just sheer volume of work. It's incredible.
Russ
and
can
quality
rip out
work
an article
too, right?
pretty quick.
I mean, it's one thing to get a bunch of copy down on a page, but when you look through and you see that Russ broke the realities around bifurcated scheduling, like the notion that MAPS MDMA could be Schedule 2, while regular MDMA, non-MAPS MDMA stayed Schedule 1. I don't think I'd seen that anywhere else prior to that reporting or looking.
Yeah, that was a big turning point for my own mentality around it. That was something I didn't really realize until reporting on it, was that MAPS wasn't going for full legalization, full stop. We're going for something else. Yeah, sorry.
Well, and I hope it's not too much to say, it's been really cool sort of working alongside you and seeing some of those developments, I guess, in your own thinking and the sort of analytical lens that I've seen you put to different stories. And it's just been really fun to kind of go along for that ride with you.
Likewise, and I definitely couldn't have done it without all of you. So, I'm always appreciative of the team.
And I also want to say, so a lot of times they function as Russ's editor, so I'm kind of editor producer. So I'm like, hey, maybe we should do this story. Maybe we should reach out to this person. Russ is absolutely fearless in reaching out to contact sources and whatnot. And you've dealt with a lot of shit. And you've been absolutely, you have been such a good sport, such a professional, and really fearless in doing that, and yeah, you just deserve a lot of credit there.
I appreciate it. In journalism school, I remember one of the first like aha moments I had was like, oh shit, if I reach out to people, a lot of people actually just respond. And that, like, for some reason, up until that point, I didn't realize that was even a thing that you could really do. So I'm
amazed at some of the responses that you get.
Yeah,
as am
phenomenal. So
Who
and then
are you,
and then we
Dave? Dave was
So
just
I'm-
going to chime in with something, but I realized he
Okay.
hadn't introduced himself.
Yeah, so I'm David Nichols, and I like drugs, and I think the first people from this group that I met in the space, actually it would have been Nishay first. At the time I was moderating the DMT Nexus forums. I was, I guess, a sort of long-time proponent of DIY approaches, the notion that people should grow and extract and develop familiarity with their drugs of choice if and when possible, particularly like the plant-based or fungi-based ones. And I was at a shamanic plants lecture at the Green Path camp at a rainbow gathering, and I was like asking, one of the presenters was Ethan McElhenney, who'd worked in Steve Barker's lab doing like research on ayahuasca metabolites and this, that, and the other. And I had all of these questions that had come up from some of the work we'd been doing on the forums around phytochemistry and all this. And I got to a point where I realized I was asking questions that the folks giving the talk couldn't answer, and then people were asking questions of me when the folks giving the talk couldn't answer them. And afterwards, somebody grabbed me and was like, "I've got somebody you need to meet," and took me and introduced me to Nishay. And she invited me to come give a poster at Psychedemia in 2012, which is where I then I saw Lily give this phenomenal talk on like power and authority, and nobody else was talking about that. I think the only other person who sort of even broached the topic was JP Harpennies, who also like made some claim about how Occupy had failed. And as somebody who had been quite active in Occupy, I thought that his analysis was kind of shallow. And we had a great chat about it afterwards, but just getting that initial exposure to psychedelic spaces and feeling that the socio-political discourse was quite lacking. It was nice getting flashes early on of some of Nishay's work and Lily's work, and I don't know that I would be involved in more public-facing psychedelia if it wasn't for Nishay. And I guess Chiara Baldini, who gave me the opportunity to speak at Boom in 2014. So, I mean, for me, I guess in a nutshell, like going to some of those events and experiencing, like in the case, like after Psychedemia 2012, there was this wild incident where Nishay was getting bullied on Facebook and some other like folks who were involved like on a book project by a much senior person in the space, and I was kind of horrified that nobody responded or like said, hey, this isn't a good look, or this isn't the way to be a decent human being. And stepped in on that. And then when I went to Boom in 2014, I ended up fielding a disclosure from this woman who was involved in the production about somebody who had been making wildly inappropriate advances and like, telling her she'd only been brought out there in order to sleep with him. And I think getting the chance to sort of present in some of these spaces and seeing how endemic some of this fucked up behavior was just like this eye-opening moment. And so getting like when Normie, I think, invited me last minute, or Lex, I guess at the time, who's no longer he's off doing some cool cannabis stuff, I think.
Yeah, I think it was Lex.
Lex reached out like a couple weeks before the Psymposia conference in 2015 and was like, hey, you want to come give a talk? And I took a bus up from North Carolina to Amherst, which was a fucking nightmare. But the conference was envisioning a post-prohibitionist world or post-prohibition world, and I took it seriously and just sort of sketched out my imaginings of like the socio-political realities in a world where drugs were now legal or prohibition was over, but all of the same structures of capitalism still existed. And
you have been like blowing that horn for years. Not like this isn't something new. Years.
Yeah, I feel like I'm just beating the same dead horse that I have been for the last like decade.
I have a barn of horses out in the back that are all dead.
Yeah. And I think like in 2018 when the Compass shit kicked off and we linked up around that, like I was really horrified with how many people were talking about needing to wait and see, you know, if Compass was going to be a force for good or corrosion or what. And Normie was just game to you know, like we would be up till, I don't know, 2-3 in the morning just doing deep dives on Tapestry Networks and other, you know, affiliated corporations.
The company that came before Compass, which sort of, when we were able to analyze various documents and stuff that they had online, we sort of used that to look in what direction stuff was going to go in, because they already had years of working with pharmaceutical companies, kind of cleaning up. One project was cleaning up the images of big banks after the Wall Street crash. They were working
industry.
Fracking. They put a document out how to sell fracking to people. Another thing that they did was with Northrop Grumman, the defense contractor. So we were kind of able to use that as a way to kind of orient ourselves and who are these people, kind of what are they gonna do.
And that didn't morph into Compass. That was George Goldsmith of Compass's company, right?
Yeah, totally.
Sure.
And I mean, we were pointing to Peter Thiel's involvement.
Are relevant to these discussions, like
Totally.
what somebody has done, how they've acted. I mean, we have to have some sort of like analysis. We have to have some way of moving through the world. And so, you know, past actions should be admissible as decent predictors of future actions, especially when you can see what people are doing right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just want to say, like, I'm super grateful to this team, like, as somebody who has at various points felt like a bit of a voice in the wilderness and like kind of exposed and generally kind of I feel like I take a fair amount of flack for some of the positions.
And that's why I refer to Dave as the tank of the team. Dave's the Leroy Jenkins of the team. That's his role.
He's the oil to our fire.
But you know, speaking of like the team more broadly, like I also would like to sort of acknowledge Nishé's role in sort of myself speaking out about psychedelics, because the coming out of the psychedelic closet piece was like, I would say, one of three sort of prongs that very much instilled me to start a psychedelic society and start, you know, being more honest professionally. Once I'd sort of had some ducks in a row. Academia is it's a hard slog, people. And so, you know, the fact of the matter is, and I think I've said this in previous forums, but it's always worth mentioning again, everybody on this team inspires me and has been personally, you know, responsible for some kind of you know, significant realization or change or insight that has, you know, affected my life, both personally and professionally, and I'm thankful for that.
Likewise.
Yeah, I think I often reflect on how influenced I have been by the thinking of this team and how much I learn working with this team, but also like the plain and simple fact that like I wouldn't be able to do the work that I've been doing for the past couple of years without this team. And so, yeah, it feels like a real, it's such a privilege to get to work with you guys. And I also think that like as more episodes come out and more of the story starts to come out, I think people will start to understand just how mission critical it is to have a group of people that can like help deal with the responses that our work gets and help make sense of what we see and what's going on, because like that shit'll make you crazy, which is so unfortunate. It's unfortunate. It shouldn't take as much effort as it does to persist in this space while trying to have serious and important conversations. But that's the way that it's been for a while.
Yeah, I mean, here's the thing: if you and other people chime in here, but if you start veering away from sort of the orthodoxy in the space, if you start veering away from the evangelism in the space, you start getting friction, right? His heat that's generated when you start doing that, when you start challenging what people just accept, you start running into friction big time. And we've experienced that a lot. It's not because we're just a bunch of assholes. It's because we're actually challenging a lot of what's just generally accepted practices, beliefs, especially on the practice side when it comes to various therapy and whatnot. Yeah, there are tons and tons of people and groups in this space. It's I have to remind myself quite frequently that a lot of what we focus on different drugs. We've done various stuff with other drugs. A focus is in psychedelics, and I have to remind myself a lot of times that like a lot of the people or organizations that we critique or we analyze, they're giving psychedelic drugs to vulnerable people. And I think people often forget that, like actually what it is that they're doing. People who have been very traumatized, various reasons, and there are people who want to give them drugs. And, you know, we start critiquing that. What is the actual therapy that they're doing? What is the philosophy behind the therapy? Who are the people that are doing it? And it just starts to, when you start to perturb the networks, funny things happen. Let's say.
Totally.
You start seeing glitches in the matrix.
Yeah. I just wanted to note as well that my own process of kind of radicalization, moving away from my initial cheerleading perspective, was really bound up with action to Lily's kind of work early on of speaking up about power and abuses when it wasn't being spoken about, and just seeing how people really circled the wagons like against, you know, those that really marginalized them and treated her like she was a problem for even trying to have these conversations. Witnessing that, I had to kind of step away from my unbridled enthusiasm and really kind of, for a while, when Lily for a spot, I was going around to conferences and mentioning like, why isn't Lily here? Like, you know, it's like that to me, like I couldn't shake that, how important her ideas were and how much the field was lacking without front and center. And then just to point out like how many, just in the conversation so far, how many discourses about capitalism, about power, about identity, and etc., that we have really been at the forefront of advanced. The fact that a lot of people don't know who we are, you know, this far in, says a lot about just the processes of marginalization around these ideas. And it's not just about us, because the fact is, like, it's not an ego thing. It's like, if this is happening to us, it says something, and those dynamics aren't okay. And there are other people who haven't found each other, who have been pushed out and silent, just alone, and are not here anymore. So that's part of why we are interested in stepping forward and saying these ideas are important. We will support each other, even if the staff in the field doesn't respect what we do. and we're not going to be apologetic about it.
Yeah.
Hear, hear.
And through doing what we do, we've also been contacted by a lot of people who do feel like they've been pushed out and say they feel like we're putting out, which is incredibly rewarding.
Mm-hmm.
There's like what is it? To comfort the afflicted and afflict the comfortable. When I look at some of the people that are the most like vicious in their responses to some of our work, it's like, this person has made a lot of money, or they're in a position with a lot of power, and then meanwhile we've got like these people ringing on the bell and getting in touch with us who were saying like, hey, like I got hurt too, or this thing happened, I'm concerned about it, and I feel like I can talk to you about it. I feel like you take this seriously. And it's like, I mean, it really is that. And that for me is the line, like, as long as it continues to be the case that our critics are the powerful and our and the people who are turning to us are the vulnerable, like I'm good with that.
Totally good with that. I think
one of the I think one of the strategies that we've employed at Psymposia is examining the gap between the rhetoric and the reality. And there's quite a bit of distance there, and considering the topic of power trip, we have to remind ourselves frequently that this industry, many of the practitioners in it, front and center for them is the healing of trauma. And so looking at the strategies that these individuals and organizations are employing ostensively towards that end, the gap is wide.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was going to say that we've already been to a lot of the good parties, so that's not why we're here. Like, we don't need to go to those parties.
We know how to throw those parties, by the way.
Yeah. and we're building it too. Psychedemia is going to be next year. We've done a lot of those things already. We're focused on the work, actually. Pretty much 24/7.
When you say the work, right? Yeah. Like, it's questions. There are central tensions around what that work should be, right? Mm-hmm. Like, there are totally. The notions of psychedelics for the sake of psychedelics. It just doesn't, at least for me at this point in my life, it doesn't really hold. Like, that's not to rain on anybody's hedonism. Like, by all means, like, take a weekend, cut loose, whatever. But like, at the end of the day, like, we live with certain realities, and in the context of late capitalism and climate catastrophe and the realities of the world that we're in, when we're talking about substances that can, in certain contexts and at certain moments, like, offer real reconsiderations of things that we take as, whether it's like unalterable truths or received wisdom or whatever, like, the notion for reconsidering what's possible and what we actually know seems to me hugely important. And I also just want to signal that, like, this is sort of the first power tripping episode that we're doing, and that we're not, if it seems like we're skirting around the show itself, the reality is that there's a lot to come. And so I hope that, like, by laying some of these histories down and some of the philosophies that I think we as individuals and a team bring to bear on psychedelia, like, it'll help inform or it'll help people understand a little bit about the broader context in which Power Trip came to be as a project, as a podcast, how it sort of fits in with the rest of the work that we do and our interests. And I just wanted to say explicitly that some of the future episodes will get into deeper dives of the episode. But at this point, I think we're also each kind of trying to avoid giving too much away of what's to come.
Yeah,
no spoilers.
And we for new listeners too, we wanted to just introduce ourselves and say what Psymposia was and what we're about, and a little bit of background on everybody.
Do people want to just give any, like, I'm curious what you guys thought of episode 1, if anybody wants to.
I loved it. I wished I wanted it to be longer. I loved it.
Yeah,
I was
ditto.
just sitting, I was hanging out, listening to it, and I was like, I could have done another 30 minutes.
But I mean, that's the whole deal. Of course, you want the first. Of course
I get
you
it.
want
Well,
the first
and
hit
it
is
was
free.
successful. Yeah.
So, yeah, it was great. I mean, I think I caught it 20 minutes after it came out. So I was like making coffee in my bathrobe, listening to it, and it's like I've had the good opportunity to get to know Lily through my work with Psymposia, although I've never met her in person, and actually I'm about to meet Russell in person for the very first time this weekend.
We're
tomorrow.
extreme
It's wild.
remote workers.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. But it was great
International.
because it still it was fresh, and I mean I feel like I know you a little bit, but it was good.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I appreciated. It's a topic that we've kind of covered in today's episode. The idea that you can enjoy psychedelics and still be critical of them. I appreciated the framing of the first episode around that. Lily, your own experiences. Like, I think the next episode might take a little darker of a turn, but it was kind of fun to hear about your experiences in the Redwoods and these kind of experiences prior to some of the darker turns. And I appreciate what Io said too, that he didn't want to make a piece of prohibitionist media and kind of the thinking that went into that. I appreciated that as a podcast that's going to get and is somewhat critical of things happening around drugs. I thought that was a really important piece of messaging to get out up front. And some of my friends have listened to it as well and commented on that as well. Just the appreciation that kind of messaging was headed up front.
Yeah, and I think we're in this kind of strange space where on one hand we're pro these substances in certain contexts, used in certain ways. And on the other hand, the psychedelics industry is fucked up.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yes.
I can speak to that
unequivocally.
That's the reality of it. It's so fucked up. It is filled with
advisors to dictators. Literally advisors to dictators.
Sure.
It's hard to explain.
But I mean, here's the thing. Are we surprised? Because this is what we get. Because we did not address this adequately with the cannabis industry, which was the tip of the spear. And the people who made, billions of dollars in legal cannabis, they learned. The question is, did the rest of us? And I don't think anybody really would scratch their head too much if you said corporate cannabis didn't match exactly with what the cannabis advocates hoped would happen. When Bob Dylan said everybody must get stoned. Here we are, okay?
Yeah.
And there are still, people being arrested for cannabis in non-legal states. There are still people who are serving out time for cannabis offenses.
Including
none of that,
in legal states,
including
when
in
you
legal
look at
states. So none of that was
class and race
remediated.
components. Yeah, exactly.
Yes. And so
And
we
now
didn't
there's a
deal
lot
with it
of,
with cannabis.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and just speaking of the cannabis space and the people who got rich off the cannabis space, and a lot of them are now faces in the psychedelic space who have maybe sold off their cannabis companies and are now involved in maybe rolling out a lot of clinics in the United States and abroad.
Make
for
a quick buck,
psychedelics.
raise some capital from investors on the hype, sell your stock, get out, be set for life. Ton of that.
So there are
Offer up
models.
pennies on the dollar to the same indigenous groups that you're also involved in extractive industry projects on their land bases, and do that as some sort of signal to the so-called psychedelic community that you're engaged in reciprocity or whatever. The amount
Philanthropy
of
101.
it's
So there's a lot to talk about, and we've been talking about it, and it's not going to go away, and that's fine. I think the reality is that we want a different world, but half of that, in my opinion, comes from telling a different story, and we're telling a different story.
And we're up against centrists,
sure.
centrists,
but
all of it.
I would also just say we're up against people who are less creative than we could be. I mean, like, I'm not kidding. Like the models that have been put forth are, let's do pharma only with psychedelics.
Yep.
Really?
The one thing positive that I want to say is that we've collectively, Dave and Lily, you've done by far 99.9% of everything, but I've been a fly on the wall for a lot, and the team has contributed to this as well. But I'm super happy that this is out. We have known about this, been working on this for a long time right now. So launching it is awesome.
Yeah, we're all pretty stoked.
Yeah, I mean, we've been, for the last year to two, we've been working on this, and just all that comes with that, all the different sources and the conversations and the connections and all that information has really like gone and informed a lot of the stuff we've been doing for the last 1 to 2 years, and we haven't been able to share that with anybody. We've been sitting on it for a lot of reasons. We've been sitting on a lot of that stuff. So to actually see this published, see this come out, and for the next few months, to be able to kind of share everything and look at everything, it's not all good at all. So I think I'm understating that.
It's like this thing where, we made a strategic decision when we really realized the scope and the magnitude and the significance of the story. We made a decision to keep Mum, even though we wanted to just scream it from the rooftops, and to investigate it and vet it and understand it with real attention to detail and nuance. And like, the price of that has been keeping Mum on a thing that you want to scream from the frickin' rooftops. And now it's like, this first episode has come out, and it's a little bit, it feels like being like, hey guys, guess what? And then wait a week. And then like, but just knowing that like we're starting to put this out into the world, there's like this little bit of relief. And I think for me, like, my sense is that week by week, it'll just be like a little bit more of a relief that these things that we have been looking at so closely for quite a while are now something that other people can look at too, and think about, and decide what they think about it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and for folks who are sort of new to our work and maybe just sort of discovering Psymposia through Power Trip and perhaps now Power Tripping, please feel free to check out the back catalog of +3. We've spent quite a bit of time hashing out some of the issues and developments and problems that we see in the space. Also having like conversations about things we'd like to see in the space and projects that we've worked on at various points to advance our understandings of these experiences and drugs, but also, what these communities could look like. I think Pace's point about like imagining alternatives and really trying to put some contrast between where we're at and where we could be, depending on the choices we make. So please feel free to check out the back catalog. And if you want to support us, check out Psymposia.com/donate. We have a Patreon that's listed there, plus other opportunities. We are entirely volunteer run. We're a 501c3 nonprofit, so donations are tax deductible. And like, I think we've been at it long enough to show that regardless of whether or not we get paid, like, we're gonna do what we can to engage with these things that are really important to us. But even for maintaining like web hosting and restream costs and being able to cover some of the bare minimum, it's really helpful, and we wouldn't be able to do it without that support. So thanks to the folks who already do it. Yeah.
Yeah,
Any last
so much.
words?
Thanks to all of you. Should we just emphasize that we're going to be doing this after every episode drops?
Yeah, these would come out
And there's a
every
lot
We're
to
gonna-
talk about.
Yeah, we're going to be doing these episodes after every new episode of Power Trip, but meanwhile, we're just going to be like nerding out like we have been doing for a long time behind the scenes, which is to say that like if you're interested in getting in touch with us or you have information you want to share, please email us at tips@symposia.com. We have a lot of work that we've done in written form and podcasts you can check out, and we just hope to stay in touch with you.
Cool.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for coming along, and we'll catch you on the next one.
Yeah, thanks so much.
Bye-bye.
Bye now.
Cool.